Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. It has certainly been a while, mostly because doing these sorts of things take effort and I have a full-time job. So, since people are still miraculously subscribing to these, I thought I'd do another one just for the hell of it. Anyway, so I'm going to be tackling these Reaper miniatures. They're just basic plastics from their premium line, not the Bones line, so they're, as far as they're like, they're about the middle of the road for Reaper miniatures. They're not metals or anything nice like that, but they're good enough. So yep, I'll be using the game color range of paints to do this. I will be aiming for a fairly low to middle tabletop standard for these guys, which with a focus on using equipment and materials that are a bit more readily available than what a lot of people have access to. This is mostly because I was talking to my brother-in-law's brother over Christmas, and they mentioned that they were getting into miniatures and 3D printing. So I directed them to my website and a bunch of others, and it occurred to me that I didn't really have any subject matter or recordings based on this sort of subject matter, so I thought I'd finally do it. That, and I have been enjoying a lot more of the single miniatures lately, and yeah, they're good to just potter around with when you don't want to batch through an army or anything like that. So for this one, we will be starting on the elf here. Okay, so I'm starting with the cloak, and I am not going to be using washes to shade it. Instead, I'll be shading it, since it's a large billowing sort of shape with more traditional color gradients. Before I get to that part, I have to give it a base coat, and this is the base coat of a dark green. This is actually a shade color, and I made a mistake here. I should have started with the mid-tone rather than the shade, but I made that mistake, and I just went on and lived with it. But we'll show you how we managed to fix this later on. As you can see, this is taking many coats. It's not covering well, so this took about 4 or 5 coats in the end just to get the color down. But you know, just put down the color, put it aside, do something else till it dries, repeat until the color is fairly solid. So you'll often see me switch between various projects in this series. That helps me maintain pace while doing this. Anyway, yeah, moving on. So yep, as you can see, this will take many coats before it even starts to begin to evenly layer. So just keep at it, put down some color, then go work on something else. So in the end, to get this coat down, it took 4 or 5 fairly time-consuming layers. But as you can see, once the coat's down, it really does look kind of, well, very dark green. So now that the base coat is well and truly done, I'm going to fairly roughly block in the areas of mid-tone with basically a mix of the dark tone and the mid-tone. So yeah, just basically picking out areas and shapes that to start to define where those shadows and colors are going to be. So it'll look pretty rough going on initially, but the way it works is that I'm constantly going to overlap the colors until it starts to look like there's a color gradient going on, shading from darkest to lightest. So you can see here I'm just putting down those colors initially. And our best way to figure this out is to just take an undercoated miniature and look at the miniature under natural shadows, where the majority of the light falls. That's where you want to paint the mid-tone. Where the majority of the shadows are, that's where you want to put the shade color. And where the sharpest edges are, that's where you want to put the highlights. Like, especially want to concentrate them around creases when it comes to clothing. Okay, now that we've started doing our midtones, what I'm doing now is going back with the shade color and starting to hit the areas where the two colors transition. And this will give us our transition eventually from our midtone to our shade, but this is a process that requires many repetitions in order to get it right. So this process basically involves alternating between painting the midtone and the shade tone over each other after they dry to make the border area between the colors a lot less well defined, essentially. This will help sell the illusion that we're transitioning from one color to the next, from shading from darker to lighter. So yeah, this is a fairly repetitive step, but I think this has the best effect for, like I said, large billowing fabrics like cloaks. Traditional shades, like you may have seen on the GW videos, I don't think they work at any good at all on basically a shape or a figure like a cloak, such as a cloak. If anything, I kind of find this part of the painting is probably the most soothing because you're just playing with color. You're working on establishing that transition and just watching the colors overlap and mix. You definitely, once you get into detail painting, you get a lot less of the building the effect, as it were, which is I don't know. I find it less fun than just doing this initial step to begin with. It's very therapeutic, I find. So this seems pretty obvious, though I just do feel the need to say this. You can pretty much do this method with any colours you like, as long as you have them and as long as they naturally transition into one another. Like, for example, the just some fairly easy paint triads are available out of the box for the game color stuff that I use for these sorts of miniatures, but you can achieve the same effect with GW paints. Just don't be afraid to water them down a lot, get them thin, almost glaze the color over. You don't want it to go on thick, you want it to go on thin, you want to have many layers. So you can see that this effort has paid off. The gradient between the shade and the midtone is starting to become quite hidden, and it's resulting in a very smooth transition between those colors, which is good because that's what you need in order to sell the illusion of going from light to dark effectively. I'm also using this opportunity to put on some spot shading in places that I feel need it, like say in some of the folds up top and some of the other transition areas where the cloak is doing that dramatic swooshing effect on the back. So yeah, this is just basically going over with a very thin layer of the glaze layer of the shade color and just trying to hide that transition a bit better. Okay, now we're moving on to... Actually, technically this is still the base layer. Now this is the midtone neat at this point. So now I'm really just working it onto all of the upper layers to try and get that transition happening again from dark to light. Because I think up until this point I was only ever using a mix of the dark shade layer and the midtone. So you can see where I'm concentrating the colour, definitely along the dramatic folds and creases and areas where the cloth bunches up, and towards obviously the top of the miniature where the most light would be hitting. And here we are on our final highlights. So yeah, this is just the highlight color, pretty much neat, just simply painting some lines in along the sharpest creases. And you can see there where I've messed up occasionally. I immediately recognize my mistake, and then I go back in with some water to clean it up before it dries. That's a neat thing about these paints, and it took me a long time to learn this, is that if you misapply or make a mistake, you need to realize it immediately and then fix it up by basically flooding the surface with water and then just washing it away. And then try again once the water's dry. And I'd also like to point out that another thing that I found out, well, I suppose I already knew with this project, was that your brush matters. It really does, especially for this fine detail work like highlighting. So we're pretty much done with the cloak, so I'm going to start doing the assorted leather and cloth bits of the rest of her outfit. So starting with, I'm just assuming she's wearing leather pants and a linen shirt, so I'll paint those accordingly with a selection of my favourite brown colours from the game colour range. This is just establishing the base coats. Anyway, returning to my point previously on brushes, I did deliberately set out to try and use my deliberately lower end brushes for this project. So for the base coating, I used essentially an Army Painter Regiment brush, which is honestly, for the price you pay, it's a great little brush just for applying base coats and, you know, doing glaze work. But for those drawing fine lines and highlighting, I just tried to use one of their smaller, like, fine tip brushes, and just wouldn't hold a point. Paint dried constantly. It just made me realize that my Winsor & Newtons, you definitely pay for the quality, and they would have performed far better than the Army Painter brushes. So yeah, so even if you're a novice painter, I'd recommend investing in a size 1 and a size 2 Winsor & Newton, and you save them explicitly for highlighting. You don't do anything else with them. It definitely is worth it if you want to get precise results. You'll notice I'm basically going over a lot of the armor bits at this stage, and that's fine because we're going to hit the armor in a later pass. At this stage I'm just mostly focusing on, once again, working from in to out. So I count the leather and stuff like that as generally sitting below the armor layer, so that's why I'm doing it first. And in the background, of course, in this shot you can see the two figures I've been working on concurrently. I am going to be doing those in a separate video, concurrently, they'll be released separately, so if you're actually watching this stuff, which I'm still amazed you people are, keep an eye out. So yep, once again, base coating layers, 2 to 3 coats at minimum, but ideally more until you've just got that even coverage. So yeah, it's honestly fairly simple. The majority of time spent painting miniatures is just getting an even layer of the coat down, I find, and that just takes time. So at this stage I'll also do the quiver, including the contents of it, the arrows as well. So those I'm just going to do like a generic wood colour and white for the feathers. So yep, and generally anything that's getting shaded brown at this stage is going to get base coated here. Okay, so onto the shades. Generally, like I said, everything with the brown that's going to get shaded brown is getting shaded with Agrex Earthshade. So just a layer over it, just being careful not to control where it goes, including keeping it off the green cloak, which we spent so much time painting earlier. Fairly simple. It's going to go on, it's going to dry, it's going to give us some nice depth, which we're going to come back to and use for our layering and highlighting. Okay, so while I'm here, I'm just going to start doing the base, nothing fancy. It does vaguely look like a rock surface, so I'm just going to paint it my usual method for painting a rocky base. German grey, Vallejo model colour, overbrush, then dry brush, then it's done. Nothing fancy. Okay, so on to layering. So again, we have applied our wash in the previous step, well, couple of steps prior actually, and now we're going to relayer everything. So again, we've got the painter regimental brush. I'm just hitting the midtones areas with relayering the midtone over the midtone areas. Fairly simple. Fortunately, there aren't too many layers and places that this needs to happen, so it's just a matter of just quickly hitting everything and deliberately leaving the deeper recesses unhit. Now it's that time of the miniature. Going to start working on the metallics now. So to start with, I'm just going to do basically the base coat for the metallics, which for every metallic color will always be Vallejo Game Colors Gunmetal Grey. Just everything, even the gold fittings, get this color. It just serves as a great starting point for metallics to go on, and we can change the color of them later on. Either brighten them to go to a brighter silvery metallic, or go to a gold or brass metallic if later on. I just find it's best to establish that initial coat as something to work off. And this, like always, there's a good view of my thumb there, will take a couple of base coats, and as you can see, I'm now also hitting things like the greaves and the like, and if I make a mistake and go over, you can see me just noticing it immediately, then getting some water on the brush and just quickly wiping it away. Now you've got to be very careful when doing that, make sure you get it all, otherwise you'll get metallic flakes still on the paint, which means if you care enough about it, you'll have to repaint it to get that effect to go away if you don't catch it early. Anyway, so yeah, it's a pretty, or quite frankly, bothersome process, that is painting metallics, as I do find that the game color metallics don't go on into, well, they're not the best metallic around. The paints with the honor of having the best would have to be both Scale 75 and Vallejo Model Air. But yeah, but for the sake of just doing these miniatures and the fact that I already have them and need to use them up, yep, I'm just using them because they're part of the set. They're also a good analog for what you can expect from a GW product. So yeah, I'm gonna stick to my guns and not use my good stuff on this miniature. Okay, now that our metallic is well established, it's all getting a wash with GW Nuln Oil. One of those two products, that Nagrax Earthshade, that cannot be beat, apparently. So yeah, it's just simple enough. Just give it a coat and make sure you clean it up if it gets onto the other colors, which you've already done. And yeah, you'll also notice that I haven't done the highlights for the leather areas yet, because in this particular instance, I'm saving those for later, because I frequently find that the highlight areas are most likely the ones to get hit by other layers when you're going through, and I tend to fix all those little mistakes when it comes to doing the highlight stages. Alright, so now that the metallic's down, we'll just do a bit of simple highlighting, so just dry brushing the original. Actually no, this isn't the gunmetal, this is chainmail, just to give it a bit more of a medieval armor-like kind of luster to it. And obviously, of course, with this stage you just have to be careful and clean it up when you go over your bounds, I suppose. Anyway, Yeah, and there you go. There we go. I'm going to make a start on metallics as well, and as you can see, putting a differently coloured metallic over a silver coat I find tends to really bring out the luster of that colour, make it like really, shine, which is, it looks quite nice, I find. And since I mostly forgot, I'm going to make a start on the bow as well. Again, I'll take just a random woody type colour from my pile and just establish a base coat. Again, since it's a lighter colour, it'll take a few layers to go down. So one thing I did notice, and it's very hard to see, is that there appear to be some little studs or rivets of some kind in a cloak's, I don't know what the word for it is, hood, I guess? Hood collar? I don't know. Lining, something. So I'm also going to give those a metallic sheen as well, just by dotting in some metallics, and once they are dry, I'll go over them with some brass in a similar manner, just to get that, shiny metallic luster going. So yep, once the gold is, well, gold, brass, whatever color it is down, the yellow metal, I'm going to just hit them quickly with a very small amount of wash. Just to, give it a little bit of depth and dull it down a bit to make it look like it's in the field, so to speak, and hasn't been maintained as much as it probably should have. So we'll do some metallics on the bow now, specifically the fittings. We're going to base coat it, base coat them with just gunmetal and leave it at that. And yeah, pretty much that is the bow, just about all base coated and ready for a wash stage once the metallics dry. Now one thing I do find is that you have to be very patient and make sure the metallics are fully dry before you apply a wash. Otherwise you'll get the metallics to, run, and I've made this mistake before, so just be careful. Make sure the metallics have at least like 20 minutes or so to dry. So just doing some final cleanup on the bow, just going over the areas where I messed up the metallics, just reestablishing that sort of wood grain, and yep, moving on to the wash momentarily. So the bow will get a coat of Agrax Earthshade, and that includes the metal fittings, because it will do a good enough job of just shading it. And we'll go back and do some texture and relayering it later on. And as you can see, I made a bit of a mistake there, and yep, I got a little bit of shade drying where it shouldn't, and I just used a fairly stiff bristled brush to go back and quickly scrub it off before I proceeded and let the paint cure any further. That's a great way of recovering from those sorts of mistakes. Even if they're a little dry, if you've got a small little scrubbing brush, you can maybe remove it and hopefully not damage the paint layers underneath. Okay, so now we're on to the highlighting, so just, focusing on the sharpest tips for everything. It's simple enough. For the colours, all I have done is just mixed a little bit of off-white into the base coat to get a highlight colour. Simple as that for the leather and the linen, pretty much. Alright, so this is a perfect example of why the fine-tipped cheaper brushes are rubbish. You can have a look at the tip as I'm using it. You can see it coming apart there. A Winsor & Newton brush would not do that. You would have, even a fairly larger Winsor & Newton, would have an almost like single point tip, which is just essential for this sort of work. You'll notice I'm trying to paint wood grain on the bow, and I even do as much. I switch to even a fairly ragged Winsor & Newton just to try and get those lines going, and the results are immediately a lot better. So definitely, even if you're a novice painter, buy a smaller Winsor & Newton and you keep it in your drawer and only bust it out when you really need those details to work for you. Alright, so home stretch now. We are working on the face. So again, this will take almost certainly 3 to 4, maybe even 5 base coats just to get an even layer on the skin tone. So yep, again, paint a bunch, let it dry, simple as. So now we're just finishing off the base, so we're going to just overbrush the base layer with neutral grey just to get that intermediate layer, and that's the base mostly complete. Of course, while we're at it, we'll keep working on layering the face. At this stage it's easy to just do one thing, and while one thing is drying, go and paint another thing even on the same miniature. Okay, so for this stage I'm going to put a wash on the face. So I thought I'd try out the game color washes just to see how they'd perform, and I gotta say, still not happy with them. Perhaps I should try thinning them out more in future, but yeah, I still find the GW washes do go on a lot better, just generally. I'm not sure if I'm using them right, to be honest with you. But yep, as even coat as best you can, don't let it pull too much, and then let it fully dry before you continue layering on flesh tones. Anyway, captured off screen, but I have made a start on layering on the flesh, so I'm just going back with the original flesh tone and just recoating everything. And now flesh is one thing where I'll noodle over it for a while until I think it looks right, including maybe adding some more shade, removing some more shade, adding a highlight, removing a highlight, playing with where the shades are and that sort of thing, just to make sure the face looks vaguely presentable. As the old adage goes, faces and bases make your miniatures aces. So with this particular miniature, I had, like I said, I went back and forth on the face for a while, adding in more shade, removing a bit of it, just going back and forth until I was happy with the results. So this will take some time as I study it, let it dry, come back to it, and move on. So yeah, you can see I'm adding more wash here and there just to try and pick out the details, such as the lips and the bridge of the nose, just to make the face appear more contoured and less uniform. So, mostly finished the face, so I'm just going to start layering on the hair. So for painting a blonde hair, you don't go immediately to a yellow, you go for a yellowish brown, or almost a stone or a tan color, and then you can maybe add in a hint of yellow, or just make it a dirty blonde. Just take a look at a person with blonde hair. Blonde hair isn't yellow, you don't use yellow for blonde. Yep, just a matter of layering it in and getting an even coat down, because obviously use wash to pick out the detail later on. And of course, because I'm a madman and used to it at this point, I'm going to pick out the eyes. So again, I would only recommend doing this if you have a brush which is capable of hitting that narrow area. Again, Winsor & Newton's are life here. But yeah, just paint some off-white in the eye slot and then put a dot, just a black dot's fine. Aim fairly close to the bridge of the nose if you can, or if she if they're using a weapon, along the length of the weapon, like a rifle or a pistol or something. The reason why you want to aim close to the bridge of the nose is so the miniature is not looking cross-eyed. But if your eyes aren't so good, you don't have magnification equipment, it's, tabletop quality, it's fine. Nobody's probably going to notice your miniature not really having eyes. It's fine. Paint to the level you're comfortable with. You absolutely don't have to do this. I only do it because I have done it for a long time, and I do challenge myself. Of course, a problem with painting eyes is you end up, again, going back and forth and noodling over them until you are happy with the result, which honestly is fine. Because I find one thing that works really well is once the eyes are actually down, you go in and just put a very thin shade of your shade flesh color again, and hopefully that'll collect around the eye to soften that transition from the stark white of the eye with the rest of the model. So it helps, get that transition of colors going, even though you can't necessarily easily get the brush in there to do it manually. And we're coming up quite quickly on miniature finish, so I'm just going to put a little dry brush of our final base highlight on, and we're pretty much done. Of course, as soon as I say that, I realized I just have forgotten to do the hair, so, shade on the hair, we'll get it done. Now, I did say mostly done, however, I realised that I wasn't entirely happy with the flesh, so I'm just putting a few more finishing touches, ideally getting a bit of a colour gradient in the cheek going. There, now you can see the face is starting to look a little more natural as we're adding colour to the cheeks, just getting a little bit more of that shade going, just to make the character look a little more human, for lack of a better word. Alright, so on the home stretch now for real this time, so just getting some more colour on the hair. So I'm going back in with the base colour, and I'm also just mixing a little bit of white in and aiming for the roots, just to get, how should I say it, just to get that effect of hair, it tends to be brighter at the roots and tips. And when you look at that, we have finished. So this is obviously meant to be part of a series. So I painted up all of these guys over the course of a week, basically. Well, 3 to 4 days. It's my Christmas holidays, so I'm just basically at home relaxing and painting up miniatures and doing assorted other things while not thinking about work. So yeah, that is pretty much it. Now this, again, like I said, aiming to do work with fairly minimal, commonly available tools and paints, and commonly available miniatures. So I tried to avoid using more expensive and more esoteric techniques and bits and pieces. But yeah, again, there's no substitute for practice. Like Reaper Bones minis are dirt cheap. Doesn't matter what you do with them, just buy them, throw some paint on them, experiment, play around with techniques, and yeah, just develop those skills if you want to actually make good looking minis. That being said, you can use these sorts of methods as well to just cut corners and get stuff on the table, or alternatively, just buy GW Contrast and use that. That's easy, but I would like to stress that products like Contrast don't work as well over large flat surfaces as they do more detailed miniatures, like with, things like armor or detailed faces and the like, lots of recesses. For large flat surfaces, hand painting and getting gradients, I personally think is definitely the way to go. Anyway, that is pretty much it for this video. Again, thank you to the people who, even though I've abandoned this channel for basically 4 years at this point, inexplicably keep subscribing. The fact that people still apparently care about this is the reason why I did another one of these, and I hope this was useful. I don't think it's definitely up to the quality as a lot of other painting YouTubers, but I don't care, I'm doing this for fun. Anyway, don't like and subscribe necessarily if you feel like it. It makes little difference to me because I am not earning any revenue off of this. But if this was useful to you, especially in getting started with miniatures, hey, that's the ultimate intent of it. Yeah, anyway, I think that'll do for now. Thank you all for watching, and look forward to the next video in the series. You've got the dwarf merchant slash gangster coming up, and the paladin cleric fighter type. Farewell.